Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, joined as usual by my co-host, Matt Karoly. And of course, we have a special guest with us. As you can tell, we have none other than Matthew Tabeek
Hey
from the
guys.
Atlanta Falcons.com, managing digital editor. You know Matt from his Straight to the Beat columns. You know him from the podcast over there. You know him from his various uniform takes and updates.
Oh yeah.
And we'll get into possibly talking a little bit about that, as well as Matt's ongoing series that you can find at AtlantaFalcons.com, where he is giving his own roster predictions. Of course, Matt and I, after we chat with Matt, we'll get into our own thoughts on the Falcons roster and what may make it up. But of course, Matt, welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. And that was probably the best intro I've ever had in my life. So thank you for that.
So yeah, Matt, just wrapping up the preseason, we got one more game in Jacksonville to close it out. And, as we all know, preseason's a lot about evaluation and really nothing else. So I was kind of curious going into it this summer, what were the players you were most looking forward to watch, and how have they fared in your eyes? And have there been any surprises or disappointments in your mind in that regard?
That's a great question. I would have to say right off the top, Isaiah Oliver, the cornerback, was first and foremost. He was declared the starter in the offseason when they parted ways with Robert Alford. But, he did get some playing, some substantial playing time, last year. But he is the guy now at, opposite Desmond Trufant. How has he fared? I feel the guy we see in practice definitely has the body language, and he looks like a different guy. He's got the body language of a much more confident guy this year. I caught up with him one day after practice and just talked about the differences. We haven't seen a whole lot of him in the preseason, though. But that said, I'm expecting him to take that jump. Dan Quinn always talks about the jump from year one to year two and year two to year three. I'm expecting a pretty big year from him, at least a solid year. He had his ups and downs last year, as we all know, but I'm expecting a more consistent Isaiah Oliver. He's got all the physical tools, and at times he's looked really, really good in practice, and just haven't seen a ton of them in the preseason, enough where I feel like, okay, yep, they are set. But I think he's going to have a decent year, that all said. And then, obviously, the number one story for me and for everybody else was the offensive line. So it is me and Will McFadden were talking today, and it is, worth noting, as we said on our podcast, Falcons Audible podcast, that here we are heading into the fourth preseason game. They've had 5, and the offensive line doesn't feel settled yet. It feels like, we're just not sure if it's going to be James Carpenter or Jamon Brown at left guard. And though I feel good about that, whoever comes out of that, I feel, like they're going to be okay. And then right tackle is undecided. Tyson Brallo had the one bad performance. It wasn't all on him against the Jets, but, it just seems now he's got the shoulder injury, but it just feels like that they're just not settled there yet with Matt Gono, who, I've gushed about since he's been here. And then obviously Caleb McGarry, who is likely going to get his first action of the preseason, who had, the heart procedure. They had a better showing against the Redskins last week. Matt Ryan was upright, wasn't sacked a whole lot. He wasn't sacked at all. So again, those two positions, really, right tackle, corner, and then left guard. I know that was a long-winded response to your question, but
no, we appreciate that around here. That's good.
those are the key ones for me. And there's been some fun ones too. So.
You talked a little bit about the question I was going to ask with the right tackle position and sort of what's going on at that group. And we got the word today that Dan Quinn wants to play Caleb McGarry this Thursday against the Jaguars. And I'm just curious, sort of, if you can make a ballpark guess on who do you think will be starting week one? Is there a situation where Caleb McGarry comes out plays really well against Jacksonville this weekend, could get the start week 1 against the Vikings, or is this really more a situation of just getting his feet wet, and it's really going to be either Gono or Sambrailo week 1?
You want to see Caleb McGarry win that job. I would be really surprised if he trots out as the week 1 starter. I really think that after everything he's been through, I think that he gets some substantial playing time against the Jags. And, I think part of it, I know he's wired a certain way. He's a technician. I don't think, it will affect his confidence one way or the other, but I think he needs to have a good showing. And I think, he needs something to build on. He hasn't played a lot at all. And so, but I think, you draft a guy 31st in the first round, you want him to win that job. I think in time he will, knock on wood, provided he stays healthy, he will. I think, the safe pick is going to be Ty Sambrailo, but I would not be surprised at all if Matt Gono is the starter week 1. It would not surprise me at all. He's a guy, as you guys know, they kept on the roster. He's a Division III guy. He has all the physical tools, and they have developed him. And he had a solid, not a great, but a solid performance against the Redskins last week. And if I was a bet man, which I'm not, but if I were, I would say that Matt Gono would be the week 1 starter. And,
I think Quinn's comments, how he said last Thursday that, how it looked against the Redskins is how he expected it to look. And to me, I kind of, reading the tea leaves, making it seem like, yeah, he can compete at this level. He can start. And so, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either. I think, honestly, that's kind of where it might be trending. I mean, it seems like he's got all the first team reps this past week with Sambrailo still nursing that shoulder. So, yeah, what a story that would be, though, if Gono, D3 guy, undrafted, is the week 1 starter. But Matt, my next question, Aaron alluded to it. You're over the next couple of days, you're kind of pumping out your roster group predictions over at AtlantaFalcons.com.
Yeah.
And I think you got half of them out there on the site. And without giving away too much of the others, I just want to know what was the toughest position groups for you to kind of settle in on in those articles?
Probably the first 2 I put out. And now the last one, special teams, is going to be interesting with the kicker. But here's the thing with running back. I thought when the preseason first started, I thought Brian Hill, because we had watched him in training camp, and then he had that run against the Broncos. He had a touchdown catch. I'm sitting there thinking, wow, he's got a different gear. He looks like a different guy. He looks leaner. He looks faster. He's catching the ball. And what a great story he's turned out to be. And then on the flip side, Quadri Allison, the draft pick, kind of didn't have the best first outing, but it was his first game and seemed kind of hesitant at times. But since then, you look at Quadri's production and what he's done. He's probably been, and I know Ito Smith has looked good, but Quadri has looked very good, and he has gotten some tough yards. I was just thrilled they drafted a bigger back, and I love the fact that they have 2 right now. I could see them going 3 backs, but I think because of everything, I think because of, look, Devontae Freeman is the lead horse, and he is, without a doubt the number 1 back, but he's missed, 16 games over the last 2 years. They have needed 3 running backs to get through the last 2 years. So and you look at all the changes they've made, they've gotten bigger. Every position they've added up front, James Carpenter, Jamon Brown, the 2 draft picks, Chris Lindstrom, Caleb McGarry, even the other guys, Adam Gaddis and Wetzel. Everybody's bigger and everybody's athletic. Then they bring in Luke Stocker, who's a blocking, tight end who also can play fullback. It just screams we have got to be able to pound the ball in short yardage situations. We have got to impose our will on teams. And I think, they keep 4 running backs and Stocker is your hybrid type fullback. And so, and I think that's what puts Ricky Ortiz's position in jeopardy. So that was a tough one to kind of work through. I could see a number of different scenarios unfolding there. But Kenyon Barner to me is a special teams guy, even though he's listed as a running back. So yeah, running back was tough, and defensive line is tough. I think they're locked in on 8 guys, but then there's 2 guys that I just had to really think hard and long about, and that was Rashid Hageman, who's got that size, and at times he's got unbelievable physical skills, but he hasn't done a lot in the preseason. And then you look at Deidrin Sinat, who's been up and down, but he played really well against the Redskins. So those were some tough decisions. And then you look at guys like Durant Miles and Austin Larkin, who have just had solid preseasons up front. So those 2 are really kind of tough to work through. You really could put down a couple different scenarios for each position. So to me, those are going to be the tough ones. And then obviously, I have no idea what's going to happen with the kicker. I really don't. In a perfect, I was joking with McFadden today. I said, this is not my ideal football scenario, but for the last preseason game of the year, I would love it if the Falcons had 6 field goal attempts.
Well, that's the thing. Like they haven't. I mean, the last couple of games they scored 10 and 7 points. Are they going to even have enough opportunities to evaluate these guys? Like that's the telltale question.
I know, and we do know that one team is going to pick up their first preseason win of the year because they're they haven't won it. They're 0-3 and
are they? I haven't even been following the Jags. So
yeah. September 1st, 2016 was the last.
Yeah, it's crazy
preseason win that they've had, and it was against the Jags.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah. So, look, I would love it if they each guy had 3 field goal attempts. I think Giorgio is going to kick his way out of it, meaning I think he's going to get out of this slump. But if he doesn't, it wouldn't surprise me if the kicker is not in uniform right now. I mean, they've got to have supreme confidence in whoever they try out on the field in Minneapolis, and if they don't believe in either of those, Blair Walsh or DeVecchi, they'll go find somebody else. And I don't want to start, the whole Matt Bryant talk.
Well, I was going to say, did you get the impression that they didn't necessarily shut the door on him? Dan Quinn said they talked about it, but
yeah.
So it sounds like it's still on their mind if it gets to that situation later in the regular season, maybe if he's still out there.
I'll tell you what, Money Matt, everybody loved him. Franchise's all-time leading scorer. But DeVecchi was here for a reason too, right? Mm-hmm. And, Matt had, some injuries he had to deal with. And I don't know. I'm not that plugged in, so I know everything, with all that stuff. But there's got to be a reason why they did what they did. You tell yourself. That all said, at some point, if you bring back a guy like Matt Bryant, my goodness, you better stick with him because our fan base right now, I'll tell you what, they love the guy, and I don't think they can handle
no,
Falcons parting ways
not.
with Matt Bryant twice in 6 months. So no, Matt Bryant's beloved. He's a favorite with all of us, and I don't know, but they'll cross that bridge if they have to, and they'll certainly make a decision because, like I said, they've got to have a kicker who's got confidence and can hit. I was defending Giorgio. It was 54, 52, and 52. One of them was tipped, and I can live with that. But when you miss the 39-yarder inside
Right.
in a controlled environment, wide left, and then he said what he said after the game, which the Falcons deserve better. You think, wow, his confidence is a little bit shaken. So, I don't know. And it looked like the hold was good. It looked like the snap was good. The hold was good. So I don't know. Maybe it's just some technical stuff. Who knows? But that's going to be interesting to watch.
I think
Either love kickers or hate them. But
I think I already know the answer to this because I think you just answered it. But my next question was sort of, you've done your evaluations of this roster and making your projections that you're going to be unveiling over the course of this week. But
yeah.
is there one position on this roster that you're still saying, like, when the cuts happen on Saturday, if the right guy becomes available, I think the Falcons should go after? Is there a sort of a position that you still think the Falcons could use some more work? And if it's kicker, obviously,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And Dan Quinn has said since the draft, he talked about player acquisition. He has said all along, there's like three windows, right? There's free agency, there's the draft, and I'm going to include the undrafted free agents in there too. But then there's end of August when other teams are having to make the same tough decisions the Falcons are. They've got guys they want to keep. They've got long-term contracts. They've got draft picks they want to sign. And as a result, there are cap casualties, which mean they've got to make some tough decisions and let some talented guys leave. And you hope that if somebody like that hits the street and he fits your system and he fits your scheme, you hope that you're right there in competition to reel him in. But yeah, I think so. I think I have said that I think if the right guy came along or the right defensive ends are so tough to find. Do I think a defensive end will come free that can help him? At this point, probably not, but it wouldn't surprise me if they tried to bolster that group. Same with cornerback. I love the two rookies. They're good, but they're green. And then you've got Bleedy Ray Wilson. But if the right scenario unfolded where they could get a corner that's got game experience that's good that fits, maybe. But defensive end and corner are the ones that, to me, because you always ask yourself, okay, if the starters go down, do you feel good about who's there? And so if Desmond Trufant or Isaiah Oliver went down for a substantial amount of time, I'll put it back on you guys. Would either of you feel good about having to put Kendall Sheffield or Jordan Millen out there, throwing them into the wolves for a 4-game stretch or something like that? It's, I think it would. They believe in both those guys, and both those guys have flashed at times. But what if it's midway through the season or come November? Do you feel good about your depth there? So we'll find out. We'll find out just based on what the Falcons do. I think they like all of those guys. But yeah, defensive end is one I kind of thought that they're kind of thin there. But then when you look at what they're doing with that front, I think the Alan Bailey pickup was tremendous. I think the Tyler Davison pickup was tremendous. And I think Kaminsky in time is going to be good too. So, those are all guys that can play the 5 technique, defensive end, like in the traditional what would look like a 3-4. So, I think Dan Quinn also, that's one thing we're not talking about because we haven't seen it, is Dan Quinn's going to change things up. He's going to play to his strengths and play to his personality. He's got guys he can be versatile with, and I think you're going to see them do different things and be more aggressive. That's one thing that players are kind of coy and they don't want to say too much, but we'd go back, we talk to players and we go, did you kind of pick up on what Desmond Trufant just said and Isaiah Oliver just said, and playing up closer to the line of scrimmage and making those windows, tighter, and being more aggressive, and so you kind of hear these things, and and I talked to Keanu Neal and Ricardo Allen, and the word unleash and taking your shots and these phrases, you're hearing a lot more this year. And so the feeling I'm getting is, if they stay healthy, knock on wood they do, I just feel like they're going to be a much more aggressive unit this year. I think Dan Quinn is going to get after it. And sometimes you pay the price with that, but some good things can happen too when you're aggressive. So and anytime you can put the ball back in Matt Ryan's hands, that's usually a good thing. So, but yeah, to answer your question, yeah, I think I answered your question. It's very long-winded, but
no, you got it.
that's what podcasts are for, though, right? So.
Yeah, I know the feeling. One of the funny things I find is whenever I check out your straight from the beak mailbag, there's always a question about uniforms. Every single week, you got to answer a question. I'm curious, sort of, why do you think Falcon fans have such strong uniform takes?
First of all, I don't think they like their current uniforms. That's
bingo
part of it.
Yeah.
The other part of it is that this city, I've lived in 6 or 7 different cities. This city swag is important to Falcons fans. And
that's right.
And so is attitude. And dress is all about swag and attitude. And fans care about the look. And they don't like the current look. And they also remember, as much as they love and appreciate Julio and they love and appreciate Matt Ryan, they love Deion Sanders. They love Michael Vick. And they remember those days. There's a segment of fans that still wants to talk about too legit to quit, right? And that team and Jerry Glanville's Falcons. So that's part of it. And I just think the fans are ready for a new look. I think the fans see other teams roll out new uniforms, and because they care so much about the look and they love I'll tell you what, if I had to tell you where fans, which uniform look they love the most, it's really torn, because you've got a segment that loves the old logo, the black helmet, the black jersey, silver pants, right? Or there's some that like all black. And then there's others that love the red helmet, the silver pants. That's my personal favorite. I've said it a few times. Deion Sanders' rookie year. Love those uniforms. Mitchell Ness just came out with 1989 jerseys. You can find them in the gift shop. $149. I know, because I almost bought one.
Nice.
But I'll tell you what, anytime you mention uniforms, holy cow. It is like putting gas on a fire. It's unbelievable. So when we came out with the uniform schedule, I teased it in the morning, and I said, it was almost like, just putting a spark out there. It was unbelievable. And then when we dropped it in the photo gallery, the numbers were just crazy. We had the schedule and the photo gallery, and then we had the schedule page. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, it was, I'm not going to sit here and talk about numbers, but they were crazy. They were crazy. The fans love the uniforms. They love to talk about it. They love to fight about them. But, it's like anything else. I've been with this team since May of 2017. I came here, and one thing the Falcons that we're trying to do more of on the website is embrace the history more with pieces and just stirring up those conversations. When you think of the Green Bay Packers or the Pittsburgh Steelers or some of these legacy franchises, they celebrate their history, and so that's one thing that when you go back into Falcons history and you go back and look at some of those teams, they've had some incredible years, even though there was a lot of lean years. There were some cool moments, and so I think we need to do a better job of talking about some of those players and some of those teams. But certainly, anytime you bring up like Deion Sanders or Michael Vick or even Andre Rison or some of those other players, fans love it. The Bartkowski, William Andrews, love talking about that stuff, and they send me in videos all the time and send pictures of them at Fulton County Stadium. I'm just trying to figure out what I'm going to do with all this stuff because I usually run 5-8 questions a day, and I could literally run 35 to 40.
Wow.
And so maybe I just need to just do more. But I mean, I have people send me pictures of their kids. The thing that blows me away, though, guys, is the Falcons fans all over the world, like from Australia to Germany to some of these crazy places. And it's funny, they all feel like they all have a chip on their shoulders. They're all like, no one respects us, not even here in Australia, right? And it's like, or I get the emails from the guys up in Rhode Island or Massachusetts. They still get picked on. And they're like, help me. I'm like, well, I don't know what to do. So we'll send like we'll send them a care package and with some swag or some gear and like say, hey, just wear it with pride, man. Just don't get in a fight. But but it's pretty cool. That's probably I write a column which I actually that's where I really kind of cut a vein and really try to be serious. But the mailbag is probably the most recognizable thing because I do it every day or 5 days a week. But
and I feel like it has the best name out there too. I mean, straight from the beak, incorporating your name.
Yeah,
we
were joking about that. We were just joking about trying to come up with a catchy nickname for the.
It doesn't get much better than that.
The mailbag, and that just popped up, and we all just started laughing, and then let's do it.
So Matt, you're telling us that if we switch this podcast to just talking about uniforms, our numbers would skyrocket?
Without a doubt.
Okay.
Without a doubt. If you ever need a boost, start throwing out the best uniform or what should the next uniform look like. Oh yeah.
All right. We'll take that advice.
Make sure you tease it and promo it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It'll be lively, I'm sure.
So my last question for you, Matt.
Yeah, go ahead.
Before we get Chad, you've graced us with your presence long enough.
Oh, thanks for having me.
One of the things I like that I enjoy that you do on the Falcons Audible podcast is that word association game that you've done with your guest this summer. So I figure we'd put you on the other end of that and we'd pepper you with some word associations and kind of come up with the first thing or first words that come to mind when we talk about Falcons. So the first one I got is Dan Quinn. What comes to mind when you think of Dan Quinn?
Intense. I think, yeah, I'll leave it. I'm supposed to say one word. I'll say intense. Because a lot of people don't realize he's a great human being, but he is intense.
How about new Falcons offensive coordinator Dirk Cutter?
Unpredictable.
The Falcons defense.
Aggressive.
Most underrated Falcon.
Dude, this might be. I'm going to say Matt Ryan.
Not going to argue with that answer. I don't think any of the fans will either.
I don't think.
No, he does not.
He's due.
How about the NFC South?
Not as competitive. I think a lot of people say it's going to be, all 4 teams can win it. I think it's going to be a 2-team race.
Falcons Saints still?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And then last but not least, 2019.
It's time.
I like it.
It's time. Yeah. That window. Okay. It's time.
Okay, Matt.
For this group.
We appreciate you coming on, and
No,
go
this
ahead.
was fun. This was I love this format too. I had no idea. So I had to stop. I had to make sure I purposely not look at myself, because every time I started looking at myself, I'm like, I lost my train of thought. So I tried to focus on you guys. But no, this was a lot of fun. And anytime you guys want me on, happy to do it. If you guys want to set something up during the season, let's do it.
We'll definitely take you up on
Yeah,
that
we'll
offer.
definitely take you up on that. Thank you.
All right, guys.
But
Yeah, good luck to your pod. And
you want to go ahead and plug, what you got coming up on AtlantaFalcons.com?
well, I think you guys did a beautiful job for me already, but I'm gonna unveil the rest of the roster position predictions. Um, we put out, Will McFadden and I put out another podcast today. Just talked about the final preseason game, and obviously you want to check us out on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for roster cutdowns, and I'm gonna have Thomas Dimitrov and Dan Quinn on the podcast. I think it's going to be Sunday. We'll probably have it out Monday. So, talking roster.
Okay, we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, that's gonna be a good one.
Matt, we appreciate it.
All right, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Matt.
I have questions for you guys, but next time.
Okay. Yeah.
All right, sounds good. We'll be here.
All right, guys. All right, see you guys.
Good to it.
All right, have a good night.
Okay, guys, that was Matt Tabeek. You guys know him, you love him. Clearly, you pepper him with uniform questions every single day. But Matt and I will sort of keep the brand going with this podcast. We'll talk a little bit about some of the roster moves the Falcons have made since last week. Of course, we'll do our 3 up, 3 down segment from the Falcons preseason game against the Redskins. And of course, we'll talk a little bit about what we're hoping to see, particularly when it comes to the roster in the upcoming Jaguars game later this week. And of course, we will answer your mailbag questions at the end of the show. And by the way, keep things going in chat, because we will probably try to do some live questions at the end of the show as well. So, pepper the chat with those questions on YouTube and whatnot. But let's jump into the roster moves. A couple of moves the Falcons made over the weekend. On Saturday, they signed kicker Blair Walsh. They signed defensive tackle Stefan Charlotte, tight end Thomas Duarte. They created those roster spots by cutting Sean Bain, Khalil Lewis, and Tommy Doles. And today, minutes before we went live, they announced that they reached an injury settlement with offensive tackle Diego Joseph. So, of course, other than McDonough and Ty Sambrailo and Caleb McGarry, I thought a lot of people had a lot of hype for Diego Joseph. I'm joking, of course. But Matt, what are your thoughts on, those roster moves?
Yeah, so the big one, obviously the elephant in the room, Blair Walsh coming in to provide kicking competition. And Dan Quinn said it's an open competition. So, it's him versus DeVecchi in this final preseason game. Certainly, not a position we want to be in. But, if they were to go out and get a guy, Blair Walsh wasn't really at the top of my list. So I'm kind of, not really enthused about seeing him. And, the reports out of practice today kind of don't make things any easier. Blair missed 4 of 9 reportedly during practice today, albeit in not great conditions. But, I was hoping that they would maybe look at a guy like Nick Rose. That was my choice, but he wasn't one of the guys they brought in. They brought in Elliott Fry, formerly of the Orlando Apollos, and Younghoe Koo from the Atlanta Legends, the AAF, but Walsh beat both of those guys out. So we'll see. Again, that's the big storyline. I think we'll talk about it maybe a little bit later in the show, but not really enthused about that. As far as some of the other moves, the only other one that kind of jumped out at me or I have a take on is Thomas Duarte. I think him being brought in kind of has something to do with Jaden Graham's injury. I think they needed, kind of a tight end, a body there, maybe someone that can, show something in this final game that where he sticks on the radar and they want to get a longer look at him, and maybe he's an eventual practice squad guy, more of kind of your flex tight end, not your traditional inline guy. Again, it's curious to see whether he gets some fullback reps, being that he's in that hybrid mold. But yeah, Walsh is obviously the big one, and we'll see how he does this Thursday kicking against DeVecchi.
Yeah, I think, Stefan Charles also fits in that same category with Duarte, just because of the injuries to Justin Zimmer and Rashid Hageman. So they needed another body there at that D tackle, at that nose tackle spot. You mentioned it sort of with Nick Rose. Given that Nick Rose played for Katwika in Washington, you also had Nick Folk playing for Katwika when he was with the Jets. Both of those guys were in the AAF along with Fry and Koo. It seemed like it made sense for the Falcons to go for a kicker that Katwika is familiar with. Again, I don't want to get into it because we'll talk about it a little bit, but it sort of inspired my own conspiracy theory about why the Falcons signed Blair Walsh, but we'll get into that later. I think one of the other interesting stories to come out of the weekend was the fact that Falcons first round pick Caleb McGarry is back to full participation in practice on Sunday, full contact, coming off of that cardiac ablation procedure that he had a month ago. That was a little earlier than I expected. When we got the news that he was, coming back to the sideline, I still figured it would take like 2 or 3 weeks for him to get up to speed and then go full contact. But it was seemed like 3 or 4 days with it. So we are, as we mentioned earlier with Matt, we are going to get to see McGarry potentially this Thursday, as long as the team doctors and trainers clear him, because Dan Quinn's like he's ready to go, and as long as the doctors say yes, he's going to play on Thursday. So that's a positive thing. Yeah, Matt, any thoughts on McGarry's return before we talk about some of the other injury issues?
I'm with you. I mean, I did not expect it to be this quick. I thought best case scenario was he could play on Thursday, but I really wasn't hopeful of it. I thought, really, I was still on that timeline like we've talked about in past shows where week 3 maybe was the target for him really getting some full action and potentially cracking the starting lineup. But, as we talked with Matt, if he gets run on Thursday and looks good and, again, he seems to be ahead of schedule or, again, faster than the schedule that we had put out for him, who knows? Maybe he's still got a shot because, they talked about him before the procedure getting 50-50 reps with Sombrilo at the first team. So it's not like, sure, he's missed a month, but they already looked at him very highly and already were close to, making him the first team right tackle. So if he shows enough and he passes that next marker in this preseason game, maybe there's an outside shot. I still think it's a couple weeks before we see Caleb McGarry starting at right tackle in a meaningful game. But, I think it is very telling, kudos to him attacking the rehab process the way he did and the recovery. But it's a good sign either way, because, again, we're not as far off. Like I had originally thought when it was announced that, we might be worried about, a PUP designation for him. I talked about quite a bit on the show, and that would mean that he'd have to sit out 6 weeks. But now it looks like he's totally going to avoid that. And, we might get him as early as week 1, or I think as late as maybe week 3, depending on how, Sombrilo or Gano do. I guess my question for you would be, do you see, because again, I said earlier, I think we might be actually trending towards Matt Gano being the starting right tackle. If he gets it and plays well, do you pull him still and keep to your plan with McGarry, or like what do you do in that situation? I know we're probably getting way ahead of ourselves, but what do you do there?
Look, if Matt Gano starts week 1, which I do think right now is the most likeliest outcome, and plays well against Daniil Hunter, and then week 2 goes against Brandon Graham or possibly Jadeveon Clowney, if you buy in the rumors. And then week 3 goes against Jabal Sheard and Justin Houston. And then week 4, who's at Tennessee? Cam Wake.
Yeah.
And he's playing well against those guys. I don't see the Falcons pulling him, But the minute he slips, week 5 against Houston, J.J. Watt, like the minute he slips or whatever the case may be, I could see the Falcons turning their attention to McGarry. But again, a lot of that depends on how McGarry performs this week if he plays against Jacksonville. Like in the off chance that McGarry really struggles and pulls a Ty Sambrailo and is bad and gives up 4 or 5 pressures or a couple of sacks, then I think the Falcons will, have a much longer leash for whoever that starter is, whether it's Gano, whether it's Sambrailo, because they're not necessarily buying into the notion that Caleb McGarry is ready to go right now. But if McGarry plays well, then I think that leash is going to be pretty short. And it could be just one bad performance from whoever the starter is, being like, okay, let's start working. And maybe it's not bench that guy, but maybe it's like, third quarter of that game where J.J. Watt is cooking whoever it is. Let's see what McGarry can do for this series, and then if he does well, then they start, then they, approach the idea of starting him the following week. We saw this many years ago with Ryan Schrader when Jeremy Trueblood was being Jeremy Trueblood. And then, towards the end of the season, the Falcons slowly started to incorporate Ryan Schrader into the game, giving him a series there, giving him a series, and slowly giving him those opportunities. And I think we might see a similar strategy for McGarry at some point this season. But, we're really sort of don't know what's going to happen because a lot is up in the air. Who's going to start? How does McGarry look? How does Ghana look? How does Sambraila look? It's not going to be an easy task once we get to the regular season and we face some of these elite pass rushers.
Yeah, as for some of the other injured guys, I don't believe we have kind of a ruling either way on some of them. I think that I believe a lot of the beat writers said that's still to come, but I know Jaden Graham, Ty Sambraila were kind of limited throughout the week. Rashid Hageman, who's dealing with a stinger that Vaughn McClure believes is not to be serious. He was out all week, so again, I don't know if we're going to see him, which is unfortunate. We haven't seen much of him all preseason, but again, the team has a couple weeks given his suspension to buy some time and make a decision on him. Kendall Sheffield's the one I'm a little concerned about how long this hamstrings are nagging and tend to linger. I don't expect him he's definitely going to be out this week, and I'm curious to see how long he's actually out for. I think this could potentially dip into the regular season, which, and we'll get into it in a little bit, opens the door for some guys behind him because Kendall was the backup nickelback. So, a guy that likely would have been an active player to start the season. But with this injury, it opens the door for someone like Jordan Miller or, maybe Chris Cooper to make the team. So that's the one I'm probably most concerned about on this list. I think DeMonte Casey's close to coming back. I don't expect to see him play given that's the preseason finale, but he should be fine in week 1. And then, good news for Foy Olakun. He's back in the mix, and all the Falcons linebackers are at full strength now with Deion Jones being full go, coming off the foot. So I think that's good news for the linebackers moving forward and moving into the regular season. But Kendall Sheffield's the one I got my eye on as far as how long this injury lingers and what it might mean for the roster.
Yeah, I wouldn't have put him on the list of guys that would play this week, even if he was healthy. So maybe that gives him, a couple of extra days of rest to avoid aggravating that hamstring injury. Maybe that improves his status for week 1. As you mentioned, we'll talk about this later. I think it's probably going to impact a little bit more in terms of the wide receiver group, potentially, just because Sheffield's primary role, because we have 3 corners ahead of him, is going to be sort of as a gunner on punt team. So I think that could affect maybe some of the Falcons roster decisions at the wide receiver group because, opposite Russell Gage, the next man up potentially to be that gunner on the punt team and help out on special teams coverage probably would be a wide receiver rather than a corner at this spot. So that'll be interesting shakeup if you're right. If Sheffield's not ready to go for week 1, then it will affect the roster. And I agree with you. It will potentially lead to maybe 1 or 2 DBs that maybe on the bubble sticking potentially. But let's jump into the Redskins game recap. And as we have done consistently on this show this summer, we will do a 3 up, 3 down, 3 up, sort of guys that have raised their stock, guys that we want to shout out, whatever the case may be, some sort of positive indicator with them. And the 3 down are guys maybe that didn't necessarily impress, guys that maybe their roster chances have hurt, or just guys that we want to have a little bit more conversation about because they, for various reasons that we will get into when we discuss them. So Matt, go ahead and talk up your 3 guys.
Yeah, so my first one, again, this was something, one of the major storylines coming into the 4th preseason game was McDonough making his first career start at right tackle. And, we kind of talked about it with Matt at the top of the show, but, Dan Quinn's comments after the game saying, it looked how he thought it would look. I thought that was a very telling statement, because just from the standpoint that the week prior with Tyson Braylor at right tackle, it didn't always look the way you would want a right tackle to look, protecting your franchise quarterback. And I think for the most part, Matt McDonough, did a great job there. There was a couple plays here and there, and I didn't go back and look at it, but, someone on Twitter made the case that, Matt was picking up the inside guy to start with, which is what, offensive linemen are taught to do, the most immediate threat, the guy right up the middle. And that's what allowed kind of, Montez Sweat to get on the outside of him on the arc and kind of pressure Matt Ryan. So that could have been the case there. And Gano would have had even a better performance than we had first thought. But, regardless, I thought, he looked like he belonged there. He looked like the moment and the competition wasn't too big. So, I mean, he definitely boosted his stock. And like we've been saying earlier in the show, I mean, it's trending towards potentially the D3 prospect from Wesley College making the start at right tackle, which would be a tremendous story. So good to see that we can have some faith in Matt Gano. I mean, going up against that Redskins defensive line, that's no small task. So he was my first one. My other one, again, a guy that we've talked about, and, a very curious case this offseason was Dejan Snot and his standing on this roster. The team brought in Tyler Davison, and, in pen, we can write that he's going to be the starting nose tackle, which I think affects Snot just from the standpoint that he doesn't have a lot of positional flexibility. He's mostly just a nose tackle. So again, in a numbers game, if the team wanted to keep more, flexible guys that can play multiple spots along the defensive line, Dejan Snot isn't really someone that fits that bill. But I think what he does well, he does it really well. And we kind of saw that. I mean, he's always controlling the point attack in my mind. Anytime you watch him, he's very rarely getting pushed around. And, I think this past Thursday, I mean, he was pushing around Chase Roulier at times. He was in on a tackle for loss there. And then he made the big play on defense, creating the sack, creating the fumble that ended up in Tack McKinley's arms. Dan Quinn, he's all about the ball and creating turnovers. And Dejan Snot was the guy that helped that on Thursday. So I thought he had a great game. Pro Football Focus supported that as well. They had him as their highest rated defender. So when he needed to most, Dejan Snot had one of his best games this summer. I mean, he's consistently played well, but, he definitely turned it up a notch, showing something in the pass rush. So, I'm fairly confident that we don't have anything to worry about. Again, we said that as much last week. I think he's the 9th defensive lineman, and then it remains to be seen whether they keep a 10th. And then lastly, a guy that a lot of us have been hard on throughout his Falcons career, Duke Reilly. I thought he played one of his best games he's ever played in a Falcons uniform. And, one of the points that I made about him is it just seems like he is picking up things a little bit quicker as far as, at least in the run game is concerned. He's playing faster. He might still be thinking a little too much at times in zone coverage. And he's a guy that's best suited to just guard a man and cover that man. But, regardless, I think, what he showed on Thursday went a long way to help maybe solidifying his spot on the roster that a lot of us thought might have been in jeopardy. Those 2 goal line stops on Darius Geis. I mean, that was some big time stuff. And Dan Quinn kind of talked about him this week on how he's improved his strength. He's gotten stronger, and he certainly showed it on those 2 plays. So those are my 3 guys that boosted their stock and, are making pushes for more playing time, if not starting roles in Gano's case.
Yeah, on Duke Reilly, arguably his best game last season came against the Redskins, and maybe he's just good going up against the Redskins. So, I would agree with you on that one. My 3 guys, Matt took all the juicy ones, the obvious ones. So I had to sort of dig deep to get some of these guys. My first guy is Quadri Olson, sort of piggybacking a little bit on what Matt Tabeek said at the top of the show. I do think Olson has gotten better as the summer has gone on. And one of the things I've noticed, sort of looking at the box scores and reviewing for some of the games is he kind of gets off to a slow start when the Falcons usually put him in at the beginning of the third quarter, and his first couple of carries aren't really going. But the more the Falcons feed him, the more sort of he gets better. And he's just one of those, quote unquote power backs, one of those volume runners that sort of you just need to get him in the flow as opposed to a guy that can come in and just sort of, do the things that Brian Hill and Devontae and Ito can do that, right off the bat sort of create on their own. He's just kind of a guy that you need to sort of feed him a little bit. And I think we've seen that pretty consistently throughout the preseason. So he's a guy that I think, most people have been focused on Brian Hill's emergence, and Ito Smith had a pretty productive game these last couple of weeks as well. So I think, just give Allison a little love. Another guy that I wanted to shout out because I've been a little down on him this summer, just because I've been, a lot higher on Jaden Graham and the improvement he showed. I thought Logan Paulson did a pretty good job last week stepping in at that tight end position and showing a little bit of positional flexibility, getting some reps at fullback, getting some reps at the tight end position, and being pretty competent there. So should, Jaden Graham's knee injury linger into the regular season and the Falcons decide to say, you know what, because he's not going to be healthy week 1 against the Vikings, let's try to stash him on the practice squad and then maybe try to bring him up later to the roster later in the season. Should Logan Paulson sort of be that third tight end? I think he showed at least enough to make me feel better about that than I probably felt, a week or so ago. And then the last guy I'll point out is a guy that I've been, riding for a while. It seemed like we were going to get some opportunities to see him at a new position this past week at the Redskins based off of what Dan Quinn said in some of the post-practice press conferences. But we didn't get that opportunity. I'm talking about Sean Harlow, but he sort of turned that into having his best game at the right guard. I think Sean Harlow's sort of on the bubble as far as a roster spot goes. I think really the best case scenario for him is potentially landing a practice squad spot at this point in time. And I would hope that the Falcons might give him some in-game reps at the center position, not just practice reps, and sort of see if he can show that flexibility a little bit, just to be an option there. Just because, I think Wes Schweitzer has been fine there at the center position, but I think it's clearly not his future at this point in time based off of what we've seen so far. I think he's naturally a guard, and he's just sort of a stopgap center option. And I do feel like, not to sit here and say like Sean Harlow is going to be the replacement for, Alex Mack down the road or anything like that. But I feel like if he can at least show some potential as a center, that at the very least he could be like a Ben Garland type of backup, even if that means stashing him on the practice squad. Just wanted to say, good performance from Sean Harlow. Seemingly these last couple of summers, he starts slow and then sort of picks up as the summer wears on. And if that's the case, then kudos to him. And whether his future lies in Atlanta or elsewhere in this league, if he can continue to play like that, then he'll have an opportunity to stick somewhere in this NFL. And, at this point in time, if the Falcons aren't going to reap the benefits of Sean Harlow's presence on the roster, then at least he can get an opportunity elsewhere. Matt, who you got as your guys on the downside?
Yeah, so I went with most of the obvious ones again. The elephant in the room, Giorgio DeVecchi. We'll touch on the kicker situation a little bit more later, but he's got to be better. And the thing with kicking, it is mental. It's kind of like golf. When you hit a bad shot in golf, it's on your mind and it wears on you, and you think about it. And I think when you miss a kick, it wears on you. And he missed 3 50-yarders going in that 39-yarder, and it was probably in the back of his head. So, my hope, like Matt Tabeek's hope, is that he works himself through this. Hopefully this competition brings out the best in him. We're not even talking about this in a couple of weeks, but he certainly needs to be better. And, now his job is up for grabs, and we'll see if Blair Walsh can take it away from him. I'm not very confident in that, but even so, if Blair is not better than DeVecchi, then we still got an issue on our hands. So, DeVecchi is the obvious one. Another obvious one, Marcus Green. He was handed a golden opportunity this summer. The team drafted him with the intention of him being the return guy, and he's, muffed it pretty much all summer, pun intended. So, we've talked about the ripple effects that this, competition can have on the rest of the roster. It sounds like, they're going to just rely on Kenyon Barner, and he's going to lead the way, in Dan Quinn's words, at the return spot. And that's going to boot someone off the roster, whether it's Marcus Green, which, again, we kind of tossed this out on last week's show, but, I don't think it's the end of the world if they just cut their losses. and don't roster him. Hopefully he clears waivers. I expect he would. He hasn't shown really anything to the other 31 NFL teams that they'd want to take a shot on. Maybe I'm wrong on that. And then practice squad him and then, kind of roll into 2020 and give him a second crack at this. But he hasn't shown enough in my minds to really keep him around. I'm sure we're going to see a ton of him in the last preseason game, and maybe he can bounce back with a good performance. But as it stands right now, he's a guy that I have on the outside looking in. And then the other one might not be so obvious, but I thought Christian Blake had a great opportunity with Russell Gage down last Thursday. He got the start, which I think is very telling. They do think highly of him. But when you have a shot to make a play like he did down the sidelines with a nice throw from Matt Ryan, you got to come down with it one way or the other. And Blake didn't really do that. He didn't really stand out in any other regard. The receivers in general didn't really get open for their quarterback. So I don't think he helped himself. And I mean, you can argue that he didn't hurt his stock, but I think, in that play in general, he had an opportunity to help himself. He didn't do it. So for that reason, I'm going to say he hurt his stock. And it'll be interesting because I think, like I said, with Green potentially being on the outside looking in, there is a spot for another wide receiver. I think, we didn't mention him, but I think Justin Hardy helped himself just by default. I mean, he did make a nice play to rebound from his drop a week ago. But I think by default, I do think Hardy is 95% safe at this point. And there is a sixth receiver. And whether it's Marcus Green, whether they decide to keep him, or whether it's an Olamide Zacchaeus or a Christian Blake, I think there's an opportunity still. And not really anyone seized it, but it might just come down to who's shown the most, who had the most body of work leading up to that point. And, for me, I still roll with Olamide Zacchaeus. I think you might disagree on that. We'll see. But I think Christian Blake had an opportunity, and if he would have came down with that catch, maybe he's, the sixth receiver as it stands going into the preseason finale. But I don't think he helped himself much last Thursday.
Yeah, look, I had Olamide Zacchaeus as my down guys, but it's just because I think he also had a golden opportunity, and his best shot at sort of leapfrogging guys like Blake and leapfrogging guys like Green was to stand out in the return game, and for him to, muff a punt, the second one of the preseason like Green did not help his chances. I'm with you. Like, of these young wide receivers, Zacchaeus is the guy I like the most, just because I think he has the most potential on offense, and also because I do think, he's the most dynamic of that group, and therefore, I would like to see him get an opportunity as a return specialist. Because, as I've said a number of times on this show, I believe that, you don't have a specific roster spot for a return specialist. You get a guy on offense or defense that does something else for you, and then ask him to return kicks or punts or whatnot. So, that's where I fall on Zacchaeus, to answer your question. I think right now Blake is probably the front runner for that sixth wide receiver spot. Then I think Zacchaeus and Green are in the mix, but I think their futures are sort of tied to, can they win the return job? And if they can't, then I think they're probably most likely to be practice squad guys at this point in time. But
what about that hustle play that he made? Does that help him at all? I mean, I would think it would. Kind of rebounded from that muff punt.
I don't know if that's enough for the,
because he has. I think he's shown more as a wide receiver than Christian Blake has this preseason.
I would agree with you.
So like I said, you're kind of taking into account the whole body of work. Sure, Zacchaeus has muffed a couple punts, but again, maybe you just have to turn in a different direction with the return game and give it to Barner, and then just right now with that sixth receiver spot, take your best receiver. That's, in my opinion, Zacchaeus, and it sounds like you agree with that.
Yeah, no. In my opinion, Zacchaeus should be the guy. I think the team likes Blake better. I think all indications indicate they like Blake because you mentioned
just by the play time, right? He was the starter. He's been running as kind of the de facto
and the fact that if you listen to the Dirk Cutter's appearance on Mike Tyson's podcast a couple of weeks ago, he talked about Christian Blake being in the competition with Russell Gage for that fifth receiver spot, not Justin Hardy in that.
I did not hear
so
that.
That was an indicator to me that the Falcons really do like Christian Blake, and the fact that he's played X, he's played Y, he's played Z, he's played all three wide receiver spots. So like he to me is the guy that I think the team likes, and want to give that opportunity. He's been the guy, I think, was it Ricardo Allen that shouted him out earlier this offseason? So it seems like all these, indicators that Blake is the guy in the team's eyes, but obviously we are, compatible on this in terms of preferring a guy like Zacchaeus a little bit more. But, the other two guys that I had down, Ty Sambrailo, just, in this case, because of Matt Gano's performance and his injury, now the question, it seemed like a week or so ago, even after the questionable performance against the Jets, we were like, well, it's probably Ty Sambrailo's job to lose. But now we're sitting here saying, like, there's a pretty good chance and arguably a really good chance that Matt Gano's the starter, or Caleb McGarry might start. And so it's like now Sambrailo's kind of third in the shuffle just because, maybe that's not necessarily due purely to performance. Maybe it's due to injuries and whatnot. But, his stock has, I think, lowered a little bit over the last week. And then my third guy, not necessarily fair to pile on this guy. I've been defending him at times this offseason. But, coming off of that Jets game where he looked really good and everybody was high on him, I thought he looked a little bit, I won't say took a step back, but he was pretty quiet this past week. And I'm talking about Vic Beasley. I thought Morgan Moses really pretty much handled him. And, he worked over Chuma Edoga in that Jets game for that sack and then was pretty quiet, I thought, against Moses. And so, the concerns about Beasley is whether or not, he elevates his game against lesser competition and then goes quiet against quality competition. Moses is one of the best right tackles in the league. Obviously, Chuma Edoga is like a fourth-round pick, a rookie and whatnot. So you haven't really seen that question be answered. But to be fair to Beasley, it wasn't as if like, there was a million snaps he had. He had like 2 series and maybe, a handful of opportunities to rush the quarterback going up against Moses. And he also got some opportunities lining up on the left side of the Redskins offensive line, which I like. One of the changes that we've seen with this defensive front is the Falcons aren't necessarily, stationary in terms of parking Beasley on one side of the defensive line and Tack on the other side of the defensive line. And so they're a little bit more interchangeable. So that's a positive thing. So maybe we'll get to see those guys get featured against some more favorable matchups when we get to the regular season. But that did stand out to me when I was rewatching the game. I was like, this looked like 2018 Vic Beasley, not 2019 Vic Beasley that I was hoping to see more of on the heels of that Jets game. So let's get into the roster talk and sort of what we're looking at in terms of this preseason finale. We've kind of already touched upon it earlier with, we don't expect, based off of Dan Quinn's history, we don't really expect any of the starters to play this Thursday. We know that probably a healthy amount of the sort of confirmed backups, at least based off of what happened last year, the Luke Stockers of the world, the Ito Smiths of the world, those guys will probably also get sat. So it's really, this is a last opportunity for maybe 40 or 50 guys on this roster to make their last gasp shot at the roster spot to potentially, maybe leapfrog a couple of guys and get into the mix for the practice squad or whatnot. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about the right tackle. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But let's circle back to the kicker conversation that we've been teasing throughout the show and discussing sort of, you already mentioned that, you thought the Falcons might go and pursue a guy like Nick Rose. I've mentioned maybe a guy like Nick Falk. I'll let you talk, Matt, before I get into my sort of conspiracy theory about what the Falcons are doing at the kicker spot.
Yeah, I'm just looking for someone that, I think can be more of a long-term solution, more someone that has some upside. And I'm not necessarily sure Blair Walsh has that. I mean, he had the one All-Pro season his rookie year, but since that point, it's been downhill for him, and he's had some pretty bad moments. I mean, the one glaring one is the 27-yard field goal he missed in the playoffs against the Seahawks. He missed a kick too in 2017 that would have potentially sent the Seahawks to the playoffs then when he was kicking for them. I don't know. I was looking for Nick Rose, a guy that, we had here in 2016. You had mentioned the Kotwick connections in Washington, a guy that was perfect with the San Antonio Commanders in the AAF last year on all of his attempts. He's 11 for 14 for his career in the NFL with a long of 55. So someone that I think, again, just needs another opportunity and could be a long-term solution, which, again, I think that's what the Falcons are looking for at this point, which is why, we're not seeing Matt Bryant. I think that's one of the reasons is they are looking for a long-term solution. A couple of the other reasons, because, again, I don't think the door is officially closed on Matt Bryant. I just think right now it doesn't make sense. So, again, looking for a long-term solution is one of the reasons. Cap space is another one. Falcons have either the least or the second least amount in the NFL right now, with $3.3 million according to the NFLPA database. Matt Bryant's not going to come back for probably less than $3 million. His base salary was supposed to be, I think, 2.8. Vet min for him is over 1 million. So at the very least, maybe you get him for 2 million. But I think he's going to drive a hard bargain, and he's going to want to be there for kind of what he was going to be at if he was still in Atlanta, which is around that 3 million. So, that's cutting it close. They need to have some emergency funds. They're still working through a Julio Jones contract, which should save them a couple million in the current year. So that's one of the reasons. I think, pride. And, when I say pride, I think because, Giorgio DeVecchi wasn't the guy they chose, just because, he's the cheaper guy. I think, again, they're looking for a long-term solution. Matt Bryant's not getting any younger. And again, I mean, it's not like he was breaking down or anything. He had the one injury, but they do want to look for a long-term solution. And, I think that was part of the decision. It wasn't just money. It did have something to do. Age was a factor. So I think they are going to stick to their guns, at least in the short term on that. Now, again, if things get dire, it doesn't sound like they shut the door on it. So I don't think fans should totally rule out the possibility. I think it's small, but if we go into this regular season with Tavecchio or Walsh missing kicks early on, I don't think they're going to have much of a choice. I think Bryant, assuming he's still out there and available, I think they will give him a call at that point. And then I think the other reason is the vested veteran rule. If you have more than 4 accrued seasons in the NFL and you're on the roster in week 1, your salary becomes guaranteed. I just don't think they want to guarantee Matt Bryant's salary. So I think that's the fourth and final reason. So again, that's why I'd say if we're still talking about this in week 2, 3 of the season, then it becomes a non-issue with the vested veteran rule. And I think Matt Bryant would become a more realistic option. But yeah, I'm just, like I said earlier, I'm not really enthused by Blair Walsh. I don't think he's going to move the needle. I don't think he's going to beat Tavecchio. And I think that probably brings you to your conspiracy theory, which you can have the floor on.
No, before we get there, I do want to piggyback off what you said about the scenario that brings Matt Bryant. I agree with you. I think really the scenario, the most likely scenario where the Falcons would pick up that phone is they'll go into the season with Tavecchio as their kicker. I have refused to believe that Blair Walsh is a viable option, even if Tavecchio struggles against Thursday night. I think the Falcons, if that were to happen, the Falcons would basically just be patiently waiting by the phone on Saturday for the waiver wire to see, if a Dan Bailey or somebody like that becomes available or something like that. But I think with Matt Bryant, I think the real scenario is Tavecchio goes into the season, misses a kick against Minnesota, and then again, like you say, because of that vested veteran rule, because by then the Falcons will have a better picture of their salary cap space, and there can be a little bit more flexible at that point with paying Matt Bryant the money that he rightfully deserves to be paid. He shouldn't be playing for the veteran minimum when you've done what he's done in this league for certainly the last decade. And that would be the scenario that Matt Bryant would be coming back. But by then, maybe other teams will come calling. I know Carolina is dealing with an injury with Graham Gano and his status for week 1. I know Minnesota, where Dan Bailey is currently at, is a team that's been struggling. But, going to my conspiracy theory, and it's just, obviously you can take this with a grain of salt, and, I'm only partially tongue-in-cheek when I say this, but it is interesting to me that the Falcons bring in Blair Walsh, who historically has been a bad kicker in the NFL, Elliott Fry, who's got an opportunity with the Bears this offseason and was bad, and thus why he was available. And Younghoe Koo, who infamously was with the Chargers a couple of years ago and missed a bunch of kicks at the beginning of the year. And don't go with a guy like Nick Rose, who, as you mentioned, when he was with Washington, when I forgot who their kicker was, Dustin Hopkins, I think, was injured, and Rose came in and kicked very well for them. And I know Nick Folk doesn't have a great career kicking percentage, but had a couple of really good seasons with the Jets, and then was really pretty good in the AAF this preseason. And of course, you have Matt Bryant, but for the reasons that we mentioned. So you have these three kickers that have a connection to the coaching staff or to this team that have at least have a much proven track record. Yet the Falcons bring in three kickers that are outside of a couple of games in the AAF have been pretty terrible NFL kickers. And so my conspiracy theory is the Falcons purposely brought in bad kickers so that, if Blair Walsh wound up being the better of that trio, that's not really saying much, so that Blair Walsh can come in, be bad. Giorgio DeVecchi can win the job, and the Falcons be like, see, DeVecchio's fine. Look at Blair Walsh. He's terrible. DeVecchio's fine. And so therefore they have a built-in excuse so that when they do decide to go with Giorgio DeVecchi, and, look, for the record, I'm pro Matt Bryant. I mean, I'm all about, I felt like they shouldn't have got rid of him this offseason. But, even though DeVecchi has struggled, and I have relished in his struggles because of my great affinity for Matt Bryant, I do expect Giorgio DeVecchi to be fine this season. I mean, he's kicking in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It's the easiest stadium to kick in, or at least it was last year. Only one kick got missed, and it was in the last game of the season, the Super Bowl. And then he's got 5 indoor games this upcoming season. So there's no reason to think that literally the Falcons can get somebody off the street and he should be competent there. And there's no reason to think that DeVecchi isn't on that list of at least mildly competent kickers this upcoming season. But it is at least interesting to me that the Falcons brought in 3 kickers that, when you look at their body of work, and then, of course, the obvious connections that the Falcons could or should have with some of these guys like Rose and Folk, who have at least been better historically speaking. They don't bring any of those guys in. It's a little fishy to me, at least if you're buying into conspiracy theories that the Falcons purposefully brought in bad kickers to make DeVecchi look better.
And so far, it's going according to your plan because, Walsh looked terrible today by all accounts. So we'll see. But do you make anything of this, the Carly Lloyd stuff? Do you think there's any legitimacy to her potentially kicking for an NFL team?
Look, it was an interesting story to me. Now I'm intrigued by it. So, that's really the kicker situation where you can just basically, roll the dice on an experimental kicker like Carly Lloyd or whatever. I'm entertaining the idea of it much more so than I would have, a couple of weeks ago, where I was just been like, oh, that's pretty cool, but that's never going to happen, nor should it have, But now I'm like, DeVecchi misses a couple of kicks in this game. Let's give Carly Lloyd a shot, at least a tryout or something,
Yeah.
So we'll see. So let's talk a little bit about some of the other roster battles, and we've talked quite a bit about the right tackle position. We assume at this point in time that Caleb McGarry will play this week against the Jaguars. I'll be curious to see what the Falcons, whether or not the Falcons play guys like Gano and Sembrelo, because as I mentioned, typically if you're pretty much a lock to make the 53-man roster, which those two guys are, at least last season and in some of the previous years, you don't play in this preseason finale. The Falcons don't want to risk you getting hurt. And so I wonder if they'll sit those guys and just have McGarry and John Wetzel and Jalen Robinson get the bulk of the tackle snaps this week. I'm curious, Matt, what do you think the roster implications are for this right tackle position going into this Jaguars game?
Yeah, I mean, I think, whatever they announce as far as who's active and who's not, I think could be a telltale sign. I mean, if we see that Matt Gano is a scratch, I would tend to think that might mean, they're tipping their hand and saying Matt Gano is the starting right tackle in week 1. Because usually, like you said, we typically don't see the starters or, some of the, locked in backups in this last preseason game. So Gano's healthy. Gano's been rolling with the ones. If we don't see him in this preseason game, because, heading into all this, he was kind of the fourth tackle. fourth tackles usually are playing in this final preseason game. So if he's not there suiting up, I'm gonna kind of start to think and read the tea leaves that he'll be the starting right tackle in week 1. Now, maybe I'll be off base on that, and they're just kind of wanting to keep him healthy since they, both of their other tackles are a little banged up or coming off, a heart procedure in McGarry's case. But I think as far as playing time goes in this, if Gano's not there, I think that's a real big deal as far as what they might be doing at right tackle in week 1.
Yeah, and some of these other guys, Tavecchio normally, like we saw last year, Tavecchio got signed this week so that the Falcons wouldn't have to play Matt Bryant. But given that this is an open competition, I think we're going to see Tavecchio on Thursday night. And as you talked about with Matt, the question is going to be how many opportunities, we'll probably see Tavecchio for the first half, and we'll probably see Blair Walsh for the second half, and how many opportunities, that maybe puts Blair Walsh at a little bit of a disservice. But, for me, my money, whoever gets to play with Danny Etling will have an opportunity to kick a couple of field goals because Etling can move the ball. But, I am interested at sort of what other guys will not suit up. Like a guy like Bruce Carter, who
it's a big
I think we talk about. He's gotten all the first team reps at middle linebacker in place of Deion Jones. One of the things I thought was notable was the first 3 preseason games, he didn't really play any special teams. And the thought process is, well, when Deion Jones comes back, he's going to be a backup and he needs to play special teams, or else what's the point? Where guys like Reilly and Grace and not Olakun because he's been hurt, but those guys have been playing special teams. And then last week we saw Bruce Carter play some special teams on the punt team. So that's interesting to me. And so I will be curious, as you mentioned, sort of talking about Gano and some of these other guys, if Bruce Carter is one of these scratches, I think that solidifies that, the Falcons do intend to keep him on the roster. And does that mean we do see a Jermaine Grace this week? Do we see a Duke Reilly this week? And so therefore, are those guys fighting, still fighting for a potential 5th or 6th linebacker spot? We still have Kamal Ishmael as their sort of emergency option as a linebacker, which maybe means that they don't necessarily have to keep as many as the 6 or so that I think many of us projected them to go with into the summer and potentially have coming out of this game. So, this inactive list that the Falcons will probably announce tomorrow as you guys are listening to this is going to be very interesting because, Matt and I are known for overanalyzing things, and we will definitely give you our hashtag inactive analysis whenever that list comes out. So it'll be interesting to see some of these. But Bruce Carter is a notable guy on that list for me in terms of whether he's one of these guys that gets sat this Thursday night.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, other than the right tackle and the kicker battle, I think Bruce Carter is the next thing I'm looking for because, as you said, I mean, usage-wise, he's pretty much a safe bet. But as far as what he's put out on the field this preseason, I've been pretty underwhelmed. I think, even with Duke Reilly's performance this past week, I think Duke Reilly and then Jermaine Grace obviously has been a consistent presence all preseason. But I'd be more inclined to bump those guys over Bruce Carter if it was me calling the roster shots, and have a guy like Kamal Ishmael who's likely going to be the backup strong safety. In a pinch, he can move back to linebacker if they needed a 6th linebacker. But yeah, like you said, if Bruce Carter's inactive, then fans should pretty much assume at that point he's a safe bet to be either the 4th or 5th linebacker heading into the season. A couple other guys I'm looking at, is Chris Cooper. We talked about Kendall Sheffield's injury. With him being out the past couple games, that's opened up the door for Chris Cooper to kind of show what he can do. And, I think, as far as tackling goes, he's one of the more reliable tacklers we've seen in this preseason from the Falcons, which I think is a trait that you definitely want from your free safety, which is why I kind of thought going into this whole process that he had a good shot to maybe be the backup free safety. Now it seems like Sherrod Niesman is probably comfortably locked in there. But if Cooper has another good game, Dan Quinn talked on Monday, he wants to get a longer look of Cooper. He's been impressed with him this summer. He could potentially sneak on and they can keep maybe 5, safeties or 7 cornerbacks, depending on how you want to look at him. So he's a guy that has a lot to gain, I think, with this final preseason game. And kind of the last point that I want to make, and you're big on the special teams matters. I think we both are here on the show. I think special teams is pretty much all that matters for the most part with this fourth preseason game, because the guys that are fighting for spots, they need to show out on special teams. And I think, one point that I want to make is Austin Larkin. In the past game, against the Redskins, he led the way with 15 special team snaps. Larkin's been a guy who's consistently been running with the twos at edge, and we've talked ad nauseum about how this team is pretty thin at edge, with only Vic Beasley, Tack McKinley, and Adrian Claiborne, only the three traditional edges on the roster. So if Larkin continues to lead the way in special teams, he's another guy I think, like Cooper, could be vying for one of those final roster spots, because I think me and you have both agreed. I seem to think they're going to keep 10 D linemen. Now, maybe they only keep 9, but if they keep a 10th one, with all the bodies they already have on the interior, I think the 10th one is leaning towards an edge guy. So Larkin is certainly in that competition, in that conversation. And again, special teams matters. So, he's clearly been a focal point there. If he continues to show that, I wouldn't be surprised if his name's on that 53-man roster come Saturday.
Yeah, I want to circle back to Larkin, but going back to what you said about Cooper, I think, for me, going back a little bit to Bruce Carter as well, like for me, I think Kamal Ishmael should be the sort of veteran linebacker that the Falcons keep, and then have the Graces and the Olakuns and the Rileys as the young up and coming guys that are developing. And I don't necessarily see the value of having both Bruce Carter and Kamal Ishmael, because as I've said multiple times on this podcast, I feel like Kamal Ishmael is fine as a strong safety, but his better position, I think, is a linebacker, and I think that's been proven on the field this preseason when he's gotten an opportunity to switch back and forth between those spots. So for me, like if I'm building a roster, if I'm a fly on the wall that can talk to Dimitroff and Dan Quinn when they're making these decisions Friday and Saturday about the roster, I'm like, give Kamal Ishmael that veteran linebacker spot, and then that creates an opportunity for a guy like Chris Cooper at the safety position alongside Sherrod Niesman. I'm with you. I think Cooper's been stellar as a free safety. I have been a little underwhelmed with his ability as a cornerback. But at the same time, that's a brand new position for him. And I like the idea of developing him more at that. I wouldn't necessarily trust him to play in the event that Casey or Sheffield are down for an injury like that. I think that would be a bad idea from the Falcons, but I like the developmental potential that Cooper could have if he can continue to get more work over the course of the season as a nickel cornerback in practice, and whether that's on the practice squad or on the roster, doesn't really matter to me. It's just one of those things where I think that's some developmental potential. But going back to your point about Austin Larkin, and I think this game is very meaningful for all these edge guys, because I think, Larkin's got a lot of work on special teams. We've seen a lot of Durant Miles. We've seen a lot of Uric Bethune. We've seen Trey Crawford get quite a bit of work there on the special teams, both on kickoff coverage and punt coverage. I'm sorry. And I've been impressed at various times by all 4 of those guys. I'm with you. I think Larkin is probably the lead dog in there. But I do think, if one of those guys comes into this Jaguars games and performs really well, has, multiple sacks, has multiple pressures, and also can make a couple of plays on special teams and make a couple of tackles. I've seen Durant Miles make a couple of plays there these last couple of weeks. I think that's enough to sort of potentially leapfrog a guy like Larkin and potentially land a roster spot. So I do think, often we sort of look at this last preseason game, it's just the practice squad spots that are up for grabs. But I really do think potentially at that edge rusher spot that there is a roster spot available. And kind of if these guys not only can make plays on defense as well as special teams, maybe we could shuffle up that competition a little bit. But I do agree with you. I think Larkin is probably the front runner to be that 10th defensive lineman if the Falcons do keep an extra edge rusher at this point in time. But I think it's really Durant Miles, I think Uric Bethune, and Trey Crawford all have a puncher's chance to upset that and sort of change the dynamic Thursday evening.
So before we get into the mailbag questions and the questions we have on the live stream, I have a question for you. I think this is an interesting one because, again, we speculate all the time about what we would do if we were in this position. So if there was a particular player that you would want on the Falcons 53-man roster but don't necessarily think's going to make it, who would that guy be for you?
Well, the answer I want to say is Matt Bryant, but in terms of guys currently on the team, that's tough.
I mean, is it Zacchaeus since you don't think he's going to make it?
Yeah, I think Zacchaeus is probably my pick.
Okay.
I'm always looking for dynamic, explosive wide receivers, and I like Justin Hardy, but that's not what his game is. Christian Blake's been solid, but that's not really his game. Russell Gage, I think, brings a little bit of juice there, but I think Zacchaeus gives you a little bit more potentially there. So, don't let good, talented wide receivers slip through the cracks. I've already lost Taylor Gabriel. I've already lost Marvin Hall. I can't lose Olamide Zacchaeus at this point in time either. So that would just break my heart. So he'll be my pick there. Who's yours?
Yeah, for me, it's Chris Odom. Again, talking about the edge, I want to get the best defensive end to be that fourth guy. And, I've been a Chris Odom fan since 2017 when he was first with the Falcons, much like Jermaine Grace. Both of them, I think, showed out. They tried to stash Odom, but that didn't work out. He ended up in Green Bay. And I just think he's been a consistent presence from the defensive end position. Now, again, he doesn't quite have the special teams presence that, we talked about with Austin Larkin and some of the other guys, but I do think whoever is that fourth defensive end, I think they're going to be a game day inactive, and it's more in case of an injury to a guy like Claiborne or Tack or whatever, then they get activated. And then at that point, you might have to shuffle some guys around on special teams. But I think Chris Odom is the best of the bunch, in my opinion. And I'd like to see him hang around, much like I think Jermaine Grace is going to hang around now this second go around. But I'm not very confident in that based on some of the stuff we've said already.
Okay. So we're going to jump into the mailbag. We got some questions that people have sent in, of course, using the hashtag Falcons mailbag and sending them our way on the show's Twitter handle at Falcons PFC. But we're going to also try to get some live quick hitters at the end. So if you guys are asking in the chat and you've sent in some questions, we've been keeping an eye on the chat, and we'll do some quick hitters at the end. So any questions that you continue to have, you can keep hitting us up in the chat with those as we get through some of these mailbag questions. But our first question comes from Malik at Austin McCall on Twitter. He asks, Malcolm Smith, Dan Quinn reunion? ?
No, I don't think so. We've talked about the linebackers kind of being set in place and whether or not they're going to keep 5 or 6, depending on Bruce Carter's status being secure or not. So I think we're good at linebacker really as far as positions go. I'm only looking at edge. I do think Matt Tabeek brought up a good point. I think cornerback is a potential option. And then we've talked about safety. It doesn't seem like they're totally set on safety. They moved Kamal Ishmael back. We've said that safety could be a spot come final cuts where they look to add an outside body. But as far as linebacker goes and Malcolm Smith, no, I don't think that's a possibility or an option.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you. Malcolm Smith's been bad for a couple of years. He was bad in Oakland, was bad in San Francisco. Yeah, he's riding off the coattails of that Super Bowl 5 years ago. So yeah, even if I'm down on Bruce Carter, I feel much better about Bruce Carter being the backup than I do Malcolm Smith at this point in time. Fan since 1988 asks, what is Gio's field goal range right now? I saw the Falcons punted in favor of a high 50s field goal last game.
I mean, they've charted him out for what I guess the longest was 54. I think they're going to continue to kind of, try to stretch him out and try to evaluate, see what their range is. I don't know if they know that yet. I mean, he missed a 39-yarder, so you don't know exactly what the capabilities are at this point. That's hence the competition. But I don't necessarily think they're going to hold back, at least not in this preseason game. Because again, they want to find some stuff out. They want to see who their guy is, and they're hoping it's DeVecchio. So I think if they have a 54-yarder on Thursday, we're going to see them pull the trigger on that. So that's kind of what my thoughts are on that topic.
Yeah, I mean that's what makes sense. But at the same time, if he goes out on the field and even if it is a really long kick and he misses it, that's not going to help the conspiracy theory that I've come up with that the Falcons are trying to manipulate this thing to get Gio into the best position right now.
So you're saying then that they're going to make his kicks as short as possible so that he can get a few under the belt, right? And
yeah. So if it's a 54-yarder, we're going to see Danny Etling with the little zone read option or something like that instead of kicking the field goal. So keep an eye out on that, guys. I got to keep this conspiracy theory going as long as I can. Mr. Party Time, aka Mr. Steal Your Parking Spot at Ryan Lee MP. He says, "Have me on, I dare you." And the reason why I bring that up, that's not a real question. But in a couple of weeks, as we're starting to get comfortable with this platform, we do want to start bringing people in, sort of as like a call-in type of situation, and potentially have you guys join us live on the air and get your thoughts and maybe pepper us with questions live and whatnot. So, Mr. Party Time, aka Mr. Steal Your Parking Spot, aka Ryan Lee. That is something that is a possibility. So definitely you want to tune in to the next couple of shows that we do. We're not going to do that in the preseason, but certainly in the regular season, that is something on the agenda right now. So definitely stay tuned, and we'll give you guys some more updates on that possibility in the coming episodes over the next couple of weeks. So that is coming sooner than you think. So, we will challenge you, Ryan, on that dare. Last question comes from at Ryan2Jones on Twitter. He asks, "What is your guys' before the season starts Super Bowl predictions?" I got the Falcons over the Patriots 27-17 with Devonta Freeman as Super Bowl MVP. I think the 2019 Falcons defense will hit their ceiling and will be the best bet we've seen in our lifetime.
So I haven't really thought about this too much, but I've also, like you, Aaron, been big on the Eagles, and it always pains me to say that, being from Pennsylvania. I think they have all the pieces. Now, again, it doesn't always mean they're going to go out and win it. You don't win a Super Bowl on paper, but I do think, again, you're asking me to make a prediction. I would say the Eagles are the NFC representative. And then in a cool storyline, I think, the Eagles going up against Andy Reid, being that Andy was the former coach there, and the Kansas City Chiefs, I think that would make for a good Super Bowl. So I'll go Chiefs over Eagles. I'm not going to throw out a score, but that's going to be my prediction. Chiefs over Eagles in Super Bowl in Miami.
Well, I'm upset because that was going to be my pick. I too am a believer that the Eagles are probably the favorite in the NFC right now, given their talent. We know the Patriots are going to be an AFC Championship game. The question is, who do you think they're going to play and whether that team can beat them? And I was trying to come up with another alternative, and I was like, well, Indianapolis.
I almost went Patriots again because I do think, especially after their draft, they're going to be, again, formidable.
Just lock them into the AFC Championship game. It's just the question of who they play. And so I was like, oh, Indianapolis could be a sleeper, but then, of course, Andrew Luck retired. Houston's offensive line is just too rough. I don't like Pittsburgh's defense enough to pick them. I'm not going to put stock on the Browns that crazy. I think that's ridiculous at this point in time. Yeah. So it's kind of either the Chiefs or the Chargers. And the Chargers always look great. We always get excited about the Chargers every year, but they always let us down in January. So it's basically the Chiefs if I'm not going to pick the Patriots. So, and the reason why I picked that, I know some of you are like, why not the Falcons? Look, my whole Super Bowl thing is you got to be elite at something. And I don't know if the Falcons have an elite thing. I think they have the potential to be elite passing game. But because if you guys have been watching the show the last couple of weeks, Matt and I have had questions about whether Dirk Cutter's the right guy to get them to there and whatnot. And so, to me, I don't necessarily know what the elite thing that the Falcons have. I think they have the potential there. So I think they have the capability of being a Super Bowl team. But I look at teams like the Eagles, their pass rush is elite. I look at the Rams, they got an elite offense. I look at the Saints, they have an elite offense. I look at the Vikings, they have an elite defense. These are the type, and when I use the term elite, I'm talking about you can make a case that they're arguably the best in the league at that thing. And so, I think the Falcons have the potential there, but I need to see it. And they're going to get it tested very early against two of the best defenses in the league. Philadelphia is going to test their offensive line. Minnesota, one of the most disciplined defenses in the league, have played the Falcons extraordinarily well these last couple of years because of Mike Zimmer and that well-coached defense. So we're going to kind of see if this elite offense or potentially elite offense can go toe-to-toe with those offenses. And certainly, in a couple of weeks, I might be singing a different tune and if they can fare well against those types of defenses early in the season. But for me right now, I think the Falcons are definitely a playoff team, but they're not going to be my front runner to be a Super Bowl team at this point in time. So let's get into some of these chat questions. And Matt, I'm going to throw these up on the screen. The first one comes from Kojak Nantucket. He's talking about jerseys. I bring this up because I'm just curious, what is your go-to jersey?
So I don't like the red helmet as much as I think a lot of people do. I like the black helmet when they go with the black jerseys. So that's my go-to. I'm happy to see that they're going to be rocking those for 3 games during the regular season, and I think that's the best uniform combination. I like the black on black.
I'm a black on black guy. Black on black all the way. I love that they're going back to the old Glanville jerseys because I feel like I like those better as far as a throwback goes. But so I'm eager to see those with the old helmets and whatnot. But I'm black on black all the way. Okay, we got another one from Matt Tate. How strong a possibility is it that we start the season all 4-0?
That's tough. I mean, we'll know a lot about that after the first 2. If we can get through the first 2, then yeah, I think it's a strong possibility. But I think 1-1's more likely with the Eagles and the Vikings, and I'm still not sure which one they get. I mean, the Eagles one's at home. And the Eagles have had their numbers, so you'd like to think they flipped that script this time around. But then we're saying we're losing week 1 against Minnesota. I guess that's possible. But I think the Eagles are the better of the 2 teams, so it'd be the tougher game. But yeah, I don't like those odds to start 4-0. No.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's if you can get through the first 2 games 2-0, then I think the odds are very high that you go 4-0. I don't think Indianapolis or Tennessee are pushovers by any means. I think both of those teams should still be playoff contenders, even with Luck retiring. I still think Indianapolis has a good shot at potentially winning that division because who knows what Houston's going to be. They should be the front runner there, but given all the stuff that's happened with them this summer with the injuries and how horrible their offensive line is, that's a house of cards that could tumble real quick. So I think Indianapolis and Tennessee are viable playoff teams. So those are not going to be pushovers, but certainly when you look at their abilities, but then again, you look at the Falcons' history against AFC teams, they're terrible against AFC teams. So we might get 2-0 and then wind up being 2-2 just because the Falcons.
That would be so Falcons. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll have to sort of see. But yeah, with Matt, I think there's a pretty low probability that we start off 4-0. All right. Next we have Kojak Nantucket. Do you think we are good at safety? KZ updates.
Coming into the preseason and the off season, I was more confident because I thought that they're finally gonna, turn the keys over to Sherrod Niesman, backing up Keanu Neal. But now with Sherrod going to free and moving Kamal back to strong, I'm a little less certain. I still think we're fine. I'd be okay with that moving forward. But that's why we've been saying I think they might still want to make a move because I think they're a little unsure still there at backup safety. As far as KZ goes, we touched on a little bit earlier. I think he's going to be fine for week 1. He had the black no contact jersey, but he was participating in some capacity this week. But yeah, they're going to hold him out, obviously, in the preseason finale, and I think he should be fine in week 1. It kind of looked like, going back to a couple weeks ago when he injured himself, again, we're not doctors or anything, but there was no collision of sorts with the ribs. He kind of just, landed on his own. And to me, it looked like an oblique, which again, I think that's less severe than a rib injury, broken ribs or whatnot. And they said there was no broken bones. So I just think some time to heal, which is what he's gotten. And I'm not concerned about him playing in week 1 and being full go.
Yeah, for me, the safety position, it's one of those spots that, we are officially a Sherrod Niesman fan podcast here on Falcon Central Radio. So I think we're okay at safety because I have enough confidence that with Niesman's ability to sort of double dip as a free safety, strong safety, the Falcons are fine. But as I'm not necessarily a big fan of Kamal Ishmael as a strong safety. So I feel like there's room for improvement still at the safety position. And at least based off of some of the players that have been rumored to be on the bubble and have already been cut, guys like Josh Jones and Matthias Farley, I think, I would not begrudge the Falcons at all if they went out and got one of those guys. Farley is a guy that I thought did really well with the Colts 2 years ago as a starter and was playing well for them until he got hurt last year. So he would be a guy that I would certainly be interested in because I do think he also presents that ability to maybe be both a backup strong safety and play a little bit of free safety that seemingly the Falcons were looking at, maybe potentially a guy like J.J. Wilcox to sort of fill before he went down with an injury. So I think there's still room for improvement, but I think for now the Falcons are fine at the safety position. All right, we got another one from Kojak Nantucket. Do you guys honestly think we can keep Matty Ice upright this season, starters and backups?
I'm optimistic. I know we didn't get a good glimpse of that a week ago, but I think it was a much improved effort against Washington. Again, Thomas Dimitroff made a point to bolster the depth, make sure he had starters not only on the front line, but starting caliber guys backing those dudes up. And, I think, again, minus Sombrailo's poor performance, I think we're in a pretty great spot as far as tackle depth goes, which, again, I think that's extremely important to protect those edges. Having potentially 4 starting caliber players, assuming Tyson Braylo, kind of recovers and shows a little bit more of what he showed towards the end of last season. That's a great spot to be in, having 4 capable guys. And then the interior, obviously they added 3 guys. Chris Lindstrom, he's gone through his struggles, but I think he's going to be fine. I think he's going to be a great player and potentially a Pro Bowl caliber player for the next decade. And then, we got Alex Mack. Mack's still doing his thing. I think this is going to be a much improved unit. I'm confident. I think the run game should help a bit, being able to run the ball effectively, keep defenses on their toes. So, I think it's going to be a much better outing for the front line protecting Matt as opposed to last year.
Yeah, for me, it's like, look, they faced some of the better D linemen in the league this year. So I think we're going to see Matt Ryan take his fair share of shots. I held out hope and sort of optimism that maybe, the Falcons could morph into overnight sort of what the Colts did last year and be one of the elite offensive lines in the league. I don't necessarily have that type of optimism or hope at this point in the summer. But I still think even though, they may give up a healthy amount of sacks this upcoming season, I still think overall they still might be significantly better and it will be less than what it was a year ago. I think ideally sort of, you want to keep that sack number in the 20s. You want to keep that number of hits, in the 80 range, which would be a substantial improvement over what the Falcons have done the last couple of years. So that would be sort of what I'm looking for. And, they have a kind of a murderer's row of D lines to start the season. So it may not start great, particularly now that they have so many rookies and young guys potentially to work into the mix. But my hope is that by year's end, it will start to gel and come together, and we'll see this offensive line, helping this offense sort of produce at a high clip. And maybe they'll get hot, and then all of these question marks about whether or not the Falcons have this elite offense can be answered in the back half of the season or whatever the case may be. All right, we got a couple more. Bite-based asked how Dirk handled the Bucs offense when Aguayo was unreliable that one year. More 4th down conversion attempts. Could we end up like the Bucs that year?
Yeah, I don't know about you, Aaron, but I don't remember necessarily how he handled that. I think that's certainly an option. As far as 4th downs go, because you're only going to roster one kicker, and if you're not confident in him, you're going to have to go alternative paths. So we might become a team that again gets more aggressive, which the analytics support it. So it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if they become more aggressive and start going for it more on 4th downs, especially with the guys that they have on that side of the football. Keep putting it in Matt's hands, keep putting it in Julio's hands, Calvin's, all those guys. But I don't necessarily remember when Aguayo was struggling what they did. I'm assuming, just based on vague memory, they continue to trot him out and continue to deliver poor results. But maybe Aaron, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm with you. The analytics support going for it more on 4th down. than NFL teams currently do. We've seen Dan Quinn dabble in being aggressive in those situations. So if the kicking game is still an issue, it could work out in their favor to a certain extent if they do wind up being a little bit more aggressive and convert a few more fourth downs, and that leads to a couple more, scoring drives and whatnot. So it could wind up being a boost to the offense in some weird way. The fact that the Falcons have a terrible kicker, who would have thought that Matt Bryant was holding back the Falcons offense by being as good as he was. Let's get another one from Debo Williams. I like Carpenter winning the left guard. He looks way better than Brown to me. What do y'all think?
He definitely looked good this past week, but I think the thing people gloss over is I thought, Brown looked pretty solid too. I mean, he had the one false start, which, led to the DeVecchi missed field goal, but, Brown's, he's had his moments, he has had his bumps, but I don't think he's been necessarily like the obvious weak link that he might end up being on the offense line just based on the talent around him. But, again, for those that are loyal listeners, know I'm Team Jamon Brown. I think potential, the youth, the ceiling and stuff, and obviously the contract too is a part of it. I'm big on him winning the left guard spot. Now, again, I do think James Carpenter narrowed the gap somewhat because he did play well. And I think the reason we saw him in extended time was because, he needed the extended time. That was his first action all season. I don't think it was necessarily an indictment on Brown. But yeah, it's close. I think it's going to come down to the wire still. And if Carpenter has another good performance and maybe Brown slips, now we don't know who's going to play. I mean, neither of those guys might see action, much like the first preseason game. So if that's the case, we might not know, and it might come down to the practice reps and what Dan Quinn decides heading into week one. But I still think it's going to be Brown. But we'll see. Carpenter could prove me wrong in the end.
Yeah, no, I think Carpenter closed the gap. I think we're back to the point where we were at the beginning of the summer, where there was little to no separation between those guys. So I think that's really where we're at now. I think Brown has looked better based off of the handful of series he's played as a run blocker. I think Carpenter's looked better off the handful of series he's played as a pass protector. That's kind of what we thought about those guys going into the season with signing them. That was kind of the expectation. So they've kind of lived up to the expectations so far. So right now, I think it's too close right now to call. But with you, out of solidarity with you, Matt, I'm going to say I'd rather go with Jamon Brown, but potentially James Carpenter. Again, that's a situation similar to right tackle position where there may be a short leash in the regular season, where if Brown comes in and struggles week one against Linval, Joseph, and those guys, then the Falcons might decide to pull the plug pretty quickly and see what Carpenter can do against the Eagles the following week. So we'll have to sort of see. Let me see. Okay, we got another question from Debo Williams. With the versatility of some defensive players, i.e. KZ and Ishmael, do you think we can kill two birds with one stone somehow and finesse a way to keep guys like Larkin and Hageman?
Yeah, I think we talked about this. I mean, if it was us calling the shots, it makes a lot of sense to have Ishmael be the backup strong safety, and then in a pinch could be that sixth linebacker that, again, if Bruce Carter's going to have that role as a guy on the 53-man roster, and, I'm expecting Duke Reilly and Jermaine Grace to still make it based on the youth and what they've shown and some of the strides they've made. Again, it's a little overkill at linebacker. I think Kamal Ishmael can kill the two birds with one stone there. And then that would open up, like you said, a spot for Larkin or Hageman or, an extra DB like Cooper. So that's what I think we would do if we were calling the shots. But does the coaching staff see it that way? It doesn't necessarily look it, but I think we'll know more a little bit on Thursday night with that inactive analysis.
Yeah. I don't have any other additional input to add to this question. So yeah, there you go. sorry, Debo. I don't have any other thing to add to what Matt said. And Zamir, I know your question about DeVecchi. We talked about my conspiracy theory about an hour into the show. So yes, to answer your question, they did bring in Walsh to boost DeVecchio's confidence. But yeah, guys, I think that's it. We're inching up on 2 hours, and we don't want to take the thing too long. But we appreciate all you guys that joined us in the chat this week to sort of pepper us with questions. And this is hopefully a new feature that we will continue to add in the coming weeks. And so, if you like this feature, certainly comment below on this video and tell us that you like this feature and you want to keep it going. And as we mentioned earlier, we do want to have sort of a call-in feature where you guys can jump on us with audio or video to join us live on the show. And if you want to see more of that, then of course, comment below. Of course, you should be subscribing to Pro Football Central's YouTube page. Hit that bell icon so that you know when we go live. Of course, check us out on Facebook at Falcon Central Radio there. You can check out all the links to follow us on the various podcast platforms for the audio version of the show at profootballcentral.com. Of course, follow the show's Twitter handle, FalconsPFC. If you want to send in your questions like Malik and Ryan and all these other guys, use the hashtag Falcons mailbag, and that's the best way we can find us. And of course, now you can see on the screen our Twitter handle, FalcFans and Matt Karoly, where you guys can tweet us your thoughts on the show and whatnot. So definitely want to hear your guys' feedback on sort of the new format for the show. And any suggestions that you have for future features on the show. We're looking to expand. It's 2019. It's a brand new year. As the Falcons rise up, we hope that the Falcon Central Radio Show can rise up. Matt, before we duck out, you got anything that you want to plug? Maybe a potential rise up reader roster projection?
Yeah, I'm still debating whether I want to do one or not. Either way, I mean, you can catch me on Twitter. I'll definitely release my projection there. But yeah, I'm thinking about doing it. So that will be on Rise Up Reader if it is. And then, I mentioned about a couple of weeks ago, I'm still in the works, waiting on that Julio Jones contract to fall. I think we all are. And then, I'll have some thoughts there going forward on how the Falcons continue to keep this machine rolling and get everybody under contract moving forward. So, yeah, my writing's at riseupreader.com. Like Aaron said, you can catch me at Matt Karoly, catch Aaron at FalcFans. But appreciate you guys tuning in. Only one more preseason game to get through, and then we'll finally be talking about some regular season Falcons football. So exciting times ahead, hopefully.
Yeah, I remember when that Julio contract was coming up
Mike Freeman.
March.
Thanks a lot, bud. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
I remember it then in May. It was like, oh, it's coming. It's coming soon.
I saw you tweeted that today, and I'm like, I had to do a double take. Is this an additional? Is this a new tweet that you were quoting? But no, it was the one back in March that they picked up on from Mike Freeman.
So we're just waiting. We've been waiting 6 months for this.
We're all been waiting. Hopefully soon, guys. Hopefully soon.
All right. Hopefully you'll get our thoughts. Hopefully on next week's show.
Yeah, that would be nice.
So yeah, we should have a guest for that to talk a little bit more in depth about this Vikings game. So check us out then, guys. We appreciate you tuning in tonight. All right. Have a good one, guys.